Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something pretty fascinating. We're going to objectively uncover exactly how the boundaries of our public debate are drawn, moved, and, in some cases, completely weaponized. You might wonder who actually gets to decide what we're allowed to argue about. Well, we're going to break down the mechanics of public discourse, relying on some really sharp sociological frameworks and media theory to see exactly how dissent is managed in both changing democracies and authoritarian regimes.
So let's start with a phenomenon you've probably seen happen a million times. How does a totally legitimate debate get shut down in an instant? Think about how a specific label, the big one being conspiracy theory, can just instantly neutralize a speaker. What originally started out as a helpful analytical term has really morphed into a tool for political disqualification. Just by slapping that label on someone, dominant actors can completely boot them from the community of legitimate conversation. It's a hugely powerful mechanism for neutralizing non-compliant speech, and today we're going to see exactly how that engine works under the hood.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the power of a label. Second, Holland's three media spheres. Third, the totalitarian distortion. Fourth, erasing the middle ground. And finally, the spiral of silence.
All right, jumping into Section 1, the power of a label, the rhetoric of disqualification. It's honestly wild how these three specific tactics can shift a debate entirely away from actual rationality. First, you have global labeling. This is where you affix a single infamous label to disqualify someone right out of the gate. You don't even have to bother refuting an argument about economics or policy with facts anymore. You just label the person an irrational believer, boom, done. Then there's the reversal of proof. If a dissident actually brings receipts, tangible facts to defend their position, they're just accused of manipulating data. Their defense is literally flipped and reinterpreted as proof of their paranoia. It's incredibly convenient because it completely exempts authorities from any accountability. And finally, the semantic amalgamation. This is when legitimate methodical doubt gets lumped in with the most absurd fables you can imagine, like flat earth theories. By merging them, it strikes all dissenting speech with the exact same intellectual indignity.
Moving right along to Section 2, Hallen's three media spheres, mapping the public debate.
To really visualize how this plays out on a macro level, back in 1986, the American political scientist Daniel Holland formalized this brilliant spatial model. He initially created it to analyze journalism in Western liberal democracies. Basically, he mapped the news media into three concentric zones, which gives us an incredible way to actually see how public space is divided and how the narrowing of debate operates. Picture a bullseye. Right there in the very center, you have the sphere of consensus. This is the no-brainer zone of shared values and undisputed cultural truths. We're talking fundamental stuff, like democracy is good, or the basic need for schools. Within this inner sphere, politicians and journalists speak with a tone of absolute, undeniable evidence. Nobody's arguing here, because everyone generally agrees.
Now, stepping just outside of that, you hit the sphere of legitimate protest, or legitimate controversy. This is the healthy middle ground, folks. It's the arena for normal, everyday democratic debate where opposing views clash institutionally. Things like debating tax rates or where the budget should go. That all happens right here. And in this sphere, contradiction isn't just tolerated. It's mandatory. It is completely vital for a functioning society.
And then finally, we reach the outer ring, the sphere of deviance. This contains everything society deems totally unworthy of being heard. The ideas our groups out here are rejected because they're viewed as dangerous, immoral, or completely irrational. Now, in a healthy, functioning democracy, the borders between these three spheres are pretty porous. They naturally evolve over time based on actual debates in civil society. But the big question is, what happens when those borders stop being organic?
That brings us perfectly to Section 3, the totalitarian distortion, when the map becomes a weapon. This side-by-side comparison really hits the nail on the head regarding the structural differences. Over on the liberal democracy side, you've got fluid borders allowing pluralist political debate to absolutely thrive in the center. But jump over to a totalitarian regime, and Holland's model isn't just a passive observation anymore. It becomes a rigid weapon wielded by those in power. You see this massive hypertrophy, this extreme, artificial overgrowth of the official consensus, right alongside the literal criminalization of controversy. The borders aren't organic anymore. They are tightly controlled tools used to manipulate the public.
So how do regimes actually rig this map? Well, they maneuver these borders in three very deliberate steps. Step 1, they sanctuarize state truth. They take falsified statistics or imaginary victories and present them as indisputable axioms. If you question them, you're treated like you're acting out of pure malice. Step 2, they label dissidents as deviants. The media isn't there to debate your points, it's there to orchestrate a public lynching, dehumanize you, and toss you straight out into the sphere of deviance. And step 3, which is wild, they retrospectively rewrite history. Totalitarian regimes will constantly shift these spheres based on whatever their geopolitical needs are that day. I mean, an historical ally can become a deviant overnight. Just look at the sudden breakdown of the German-Soviet alliance in 1941. The media just instantly rewrites the past to pretend the new consensus was always the case.
Let's look even closer in Section 4, Erasing the Middle Ground, the Mechanics of Forced Displacement.
When you're in the middle of a democratic crisis or a shift toward authoritarianism, authorities systematically liquidate that vital middle space for debate. The whole architecture gets re-engineered. The consensus sphere stops reflecting shared cultural agreement. Instead, it artificially balloons into an obligatory state ideology that swallows up all public and private life. Because political pluralism is a threat to that control, the legitimate controversy sphere is systematically liquidated. Nuance is out the window, and as a direct result, the deviant sphere gets an infinite extension. Anything that isn't explicitly mandatory becomes highly suspect. Even having a moderate opinion, or just wanting to stay neutral, gets you immediately tossed into deviance.
This right here is what we call forced displacement. Entire subjects that society used to debate normally and legitimately are brutally shoved straight into deviance. Citizens are left with absolutely zero middle ground. It's a binary choice. You either adhere 100% to the mandated consensus, or you're relegated to deviance and hit with labels like enemy of the truth. The space for peaceful conflict and the regular confrontation of ideas completely erased. And this kind of massive social engineering doesn't just alter politics, it genuinely changes human behavior.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5. The spiral of silence, the psychological consequences.
Check out this incredibly powerful quote. To prevent the emergence of concepts capable of fueling a sphere of controversy, the regime impoverishes and codifies language. Words lose their original meaning. That is literally neo-language in action. By destroying language and stripping meaning away from words, a regime ensures that intellectual dissent becomes practically impossible. You quite literally do not have the vocabulary left to formulate a legitimate controversy.
And the reason this matters so much is because the fallout on collective psychology is just devastating. First, you get preventive self-censorship. When people are staring down the barrel of severe social or professional sanctions, they just internalize the limits to stay safe. They stick to the imposed consensus purely to survive. Second is the fabrication of false unanimity. By totally saturating the media, the regime creates this illusion of universal support. So an isolated citizen who doesn't realize their own neighbors probably share their exact same doubts stays dead silent out of fear of being ostracized. It's the classic spiral of silence. But ironically, this whole strategy often blows up in their faces, leading to radical polarization. Suppressing credible alternatives totally destroys public trusts in institutions, which drives citizens en masse to unregulated underground channels. And ultimately, this causes a massive rupture of social ties. Real conspiracy theories thrive in this breeding ground of mistrust because the public completely loses the ability to distinguish between legitimate doubt and actual engineered manipulation.
When a system atrophies legitimate controversy and artificially inflates a fake consensus, it's essentially using this map as a method to maintain power and imprison free thought. So I want to leave you with this question to chew on. Can you still tell the difference between a legitimate doubt and an engineered deviance? As you're navigating the news or just chatting with people today, ask yourself who is drawing the borders of your debate and what incredibly important, nuanced ideas might be shrinking into deviance in the process. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the boundaries.